Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, my topic is all about a review of basic literary concepts. Um, before we start with our discussion today, let us first familiarize what we have to do after listening to this discussion or our lesson objectives. First is, of course, identify various elements, techniques, and literary devices. Read closely as writers with a consciousness of craft. Use language to give emotional and intellectual response. Enumerate elements of fiction. Analyze a fictional piece through its elements. Use plot and structure, character, point of view, style, language and style, setting, irony and symbol, and finally write journal entries and short story exercises exploring key elements of fiction. Now, before I will start with the discussion, let me ask you first how you define literature, how far you've learned about literature. Well, basically, we already studied literature in our undergraduate studies. So this is just going to be sort of review in our case since we already had a number of literatures before. Okay. Literature, according to experts, its bottom line is language. It is an expression of ideas, feelings, and emotions. But it is not just a mere expression of feelings and emotions. We need to present our ideas in a creative way so that it can capture not just the interest of our readers, but also to stimulate or to encourage them to do writing too. Okay. Um, this presents well expressed ideas or feelings, usually in symbols or metaphors. So, here, just like what I said earlier, it's about expressing our feelings and emotions. But without proper study in on how to write effectively, or without any ideas on the concepts or basic literary concepts, we won't be able to really write down or creatively write down our ideas, since this demands uh, a skill to write metaphorically our ideas and experiences or feelings. To express feelings spontaneously is, of course, different from writing or talking about it in normal or ordinary communication discourse. This was done in the novels of Jose Rizal, Stephen Havillana, uh, Charles Dickens, Victor Hugo, among so many others. This is no longer self expression, but conceptual expression, the one that we refer to as literature. Now, is literature important at all? Why do we need to study literature? Literature. Why is it in the curriculum? And why do most of our students find it just a mere or another requirement or language requirement? Some would say or may say that literature is just another writing requirement, or um, this is just like the subject of a result that is just necessary because it's in the curriculum. But I would like to convince everyone that literature is important because it's from which we learn a lot from about life, about uh, just about anything. Okay. According to Bhaskara 2003, literature means uh, turning blood into ink. What is that? Turning blood into ink means you need to put in your efforts. You need to exert efforts. You need to strive hard to put into words what you experienced, what you are feeling, what you want to say, not in an ordinary manner or communication discourse. Another definition is forwarded by Merriam-Webster. Webster said that literature refers to written works such as poems, plays, and novels that are considered to be very good and have lasting importance. If if you come to think about it, we have learned about the past. We have learned about what Jose Rizal did during his time because of the written works of so many experts and writers. Without writers, we cannot learn what was happening or what happened in the past. So again, literature is not just literature. Literature is helping us trace back our identity. It helps us go back to what and how we have been in the past. So it is something that should not be taken lightly. Okay. Um, Another nature of literature is that it is a window to culture. Window to culture in the sense that when you are reading something, the writer is presenting to us or oh, how should we call this? The writer is sharing to us what are his or her practices in his or her locality, in his or her area. And it allows us to see and learn from their culture, um, just like that of uh, in the story of those in um, the Ifugo stories, or the stories of um, who's this writer, Nick Joaquin. Without these uh, writers' efforts in writing down their beliefs and experiences in culture, we wouldn't be able to learn from them that something is existing in that particular area. So again, it is just necessary for us to learn and appreciate literature in its deepest sense. Okay. Another is uh, types of literature. For the types of literature, we basically have a nonfiction and fiction. For nonfiction, of course, this discusses or talks about um, real events or facts. Okay? Writing that deals with real people, real places, real events. And this is, of course, opposite of fiction. Fiction is all about imagination. It's an imaginative writing. Okay? Nonfiction has um, types too. Narrative nonfiction is writing that tells a story, and we have five kinds of it. We have biography and autobiography, letters, diaries and journals, book review, literary criticism, scientific and current publications. For biography and autobiography, and then the letters, diaries, and journals, this is what we call narrative because the writer is narrating events, real events at that. And for the third, fourth, and fifth ones, we have book review, literary criticism, and we have scientific and current publications. This is what we call informative nonfiction. For biography and autobiography, the differences of these two is that biography is a story of a person, usually written by another person. A life story of a person written by another person, just like the life of Jose Rizal. The subject that we took in our college years, the book or reference that we used before, was not really written by Jose Rizal himself. It was written by some people different from Rizal. So that's what we call biography. Autobiography, on the other hand, is a life story of a person written by himself. Okay, so if I would be writing down my own story, that would be autobiography. If I would be writing down the story of Rizal, that is, my writing is called biography. I hope we are clear with that. Another is letters, diaries, and journals. These are real events. You know, when we write our experiences in our diaries or journals, we can't make up or imagine things just to write down what really happened in our lives in the days or in those days. Okay, in letters too, when we send letters to people we know, or to friends we know, we don't imagine things. We share the facts, we share what really happened to us, or something that talks about real events. For the book review, literary criticism, scientific and current publication, again, this is informative nonfiction. Book review is, of course, a review of what you have read in the book. You have to give your insights or on how you or what you learned from that book you're reading. Now there is literary criticism. Literary criticism is all about presenting the good and the bad side of the story. The good side, what makes it a good story, and what could have been done differently in order to improve the story that we are reading. That is informative. Another is scientific and current publications. Of course, these are researches. And because these are researches, we cannot just, imagine data and present it in our book or in our researches. Now let's move on to fiction. Fiction are written stories that talks about people and events that are not real. Again, this is the opposite of nonfiction. So if nonfiction talks about real events, fiction discusses things that are not real. We have forms or types of fictional works. The first one, we have prose allegory, prose romances, prose satires, novels, short stories, and novelettes. For the prose allegory, we have fables, myths, and legends. Fables, these are stories that we really love to read when we were kids. Um, these usually employs animals as characters in order to give us a moral lesson. And then myths. Myths are stories that with the intervention of gods and goddesses, supernatural, or something that is not normal. And then the legends. We also have prose romances. Prose romances are those fairy tales, um, folk tales, and these, of course, because it's romance, it talks about happily ever after, or it always ends up with a happy ending, or with yes, it has a happy ending. Another is prose satires. We have Fablu, and then the novels, we have sci-fi or science fiction. We have religious. For the sci-fi, we have the work of Victor Hugo. And then for the religious, we have Dan Brown. Dan Brown, though it's really hard to detect his belief in God, it's hard to detect his religion in his book, because uh, in his novels, um, he presented he presented his sides differently in different novels too. And then we have romantic, of course. We have realistic. We have in many other kinds of novels. And then we have short stories. Short story is called short story because this can be done or it can be read through or it can be finished, or we can finish reading this short story in one sitting. As compared to novels, we can finish reading novels in one sitting. We have to stop, uh, sometimes we have to stop for some reason and then go back to where we left off or where we stopped and then continue, but without losing from the track. Okay, another is novelettes. Novelettes are stories that are too short to become a short story, and too short to become a novel and too long to become a short story. Another another um, literary concept that we need to familiarize is, of course, the genre. In literature, we have three basic or general genres. We have poetry, we have drama, we have prose. Then for poetry or poems, a poem is a piece of writing that usually has figurative language, and that is written in separate lines that often have repeated rhythm and sometimes rhyme. So we already know about this. In poetry, simply put, it's putting words on paper to express in part thoughts from me right to your heart, to the reader's heart. Okay, now let's discuss the elements of poetry. What are the things that we need to pay attention to whenever we read poems or if yes, poetry? We have the speaker, the content, theme, shape and form, and then mood or tone. For the speaker, this refers to someone that is talking in the poem and usually refers to the writer. But the writer or the poet presents himself in different ways. He or she can be a plant or an abstract thing or ideas or whatever. So we need to pay attention to who is speaking in the poem that we are reading. Another is content. It is the subject of the poem. What is the poem all about? What happens in the poem? These basically points or this basically answers the question what. Okay, what is the poem all about? What happened in the poem, and all. And then theme. It is the meaning of the poem and the main idea the poet is trying to communicate. The theme can be implied or expressed directly. Shape and form. In poetry, the shape and form vary, of course. We have the structured and unstructured. We have the the rhymed, and then we have the free verse. Another is mood or tone. It is the feeling that the poet creates and that the reader senses through the poet's choice of words, rhythm, rhyme, style, and structure. So when we are reading, we need to also detect what is the tone of the speaker while trying to communicate to the readers, to us, the readers. Um, it could be that the writer is sad or so happy or melancholy or in love. We need to pay attention to this and how. We need to pay attention to the way the writer uses or presents his words or ideas. In literature, in poetry in particular, the author or the poet is, of course, using language that we need to understand deeper, for us to learn or to know the feelings or emotions present in the poem that we are reading. Next is imagery. The imagery, these are words or the use of words of the writer that usually requires or appeals to our senses. Okay? This refers to the pictures which we perceive with our minds, eyes, ears, nose, our five senses, through which we experience the delicate world that the writer is creating. So, when we are reading class, we need to understand the situation of the writer while he was writing the literary piece, and we don't have to insist in our opinions or in our beliefs or our own ideas, because if we're going to do it, we won't be able to and fully understand what the writer is trying to communicate to us. We need to, while reading, we need to experience or to live in that fictional world he or she created. Okay, an example of this is Love Story by Conrado Ramirez. I walked last summer into the barrio of Niogan. A pretty girl was singing at a lighted door. Now, a woman sits weeping at my darkened window. I walked last summer into the barrio of Niogan. So while we are reading, or every time, or when we are reading that poem, it allows us to picture out someone who walks into a certain barrio and saw a pretty girl in a lighted door, and he compared that experience from the past to what happened in the present, that that girl is now sitting at the writer's darkened window while weeping. Okay, and it allows us to understand from there what happened in the poem. Next is symbol. Symbol is an object, a picture, a written word, or a sound that is used to represent something else, either by resemblance, convention, or association. Symbol, the use of another words or presenting object that may represent something else in the poem that we are reading. So we need to pay attention to this too in order for us to fully understand what the writer is trying to communicate to us. Diction. It is the poet's choice of words. The poet chooses each word carefully so that both its meaning and sound contribute to the tone and feeling of the poem. The poet must consider a word's denotation and connotation. So the denotation means the dictionary meaning. Connotation means the the deeper sense or meaning of the word. Okay, the emotions, thoughts, and ideas associated with and evoked by the word. That is what we call connotation. Diction, too, in according to some experts, this allows the readers to detect who is writing what based on the kinds of words that the writer is using. That is at the diction, the sound of the writer. That even without looking into who writes the poem or the story, still the reader can detect that this poem is written by Rizal, this poem was written by Tiempo, or written by Shakespeare, because the reader has learned already the kinds of or the technique that the author or poet is using. Next, we have figures of speech. We have a lot of figures of speech, and we'll be discussing these figures of speech in a little while. Next, we have meter. Okay. Um, For the types of poetry too, we have narrative poetry, lyric poetry, and dramatic poetry. For the narrative poetry, this includes epic, metrical tale, metrical romance, and ballad. For the epic, this is a poem that tells us about the adventure of a hero, usually written down in stanza form. Metrical tale in metrical romance and ballad are still narrative, called narrative poetry because this narrates or tells us a story about a warrior, about two lovers, about two persons or more. Okay. Next is lyric. Lyric poetry. This is called lyric because these are poems that can be sung in an accompaniment of a lyre. Okay, so we have ode. Ode is a poem that expresses praises and adoration to something or someone. We have elegy. Elegy is a kind of poem that expresses grief over the death of someone. Sonnet is a 14 line poem. And then song, of course, song. Songs, by the way, are exempted from the rules of grammar because the the writers have to look into how would they how would the song be sung better. They consider rhythm and rhyme too. So again, they are exempted from the rules of grammar. Dramatic poetry. This includes dramatic monologue and soliloquy. Short story. So we have short story, just like what we learned earlier, that short story is a story that can be finished in one sitting. It is a brief work of literature, usually written in narrative prose. Its characteristics, we have a short story is structure. Of course, it has a plot. It has an introduction, a rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement or the resolution. We Short story is complete. Complete. It should not leave the readers hanging, but in some way too, a story is considered good and effective if it leaves the readers crave for more about this story. But again, a short story should be complete. It should be well proportioned too, and it should be compact. Next is play or drama. It is a piece of writing that tells a story and is performed on stage. Of course, that's very understandable. Elements of fiction. For the plot and structure, plot is a series of events and character actions that relate to the central conflict. We have kinds of plot too. Uh, we have linear plot, non-linear, and episodic plot structure. For the plot that we normally knew about, like the introduction, the rising action, the climax, falling action, and resolution. This concept in a pyramid was developed by Gustav Freytag, or this is called Gustav Freytag's pyramid. But let's try to know more about the kinds of plot. For the linear plot, this begins at point A, progresses through events which build towards a climax, and then finally reaching point B. So basically, it just introduces us about what the story will be about, and then reaches the climax, and then down to point B or the ending. So starts from A, progresses to climax, and then going finally reaching point B. So if we're going to draw it in a straight line, it's gonna be A, or the introduction, and at the middle of the line, that is called climax, and at the end, that is what we call point B. So linear. In communication too, um, oh, I hope you remember that linear communication is like presenting um, ideas one way. So this is kind of similar to this plot, like one line. So um, there is no turning back to retract or whatever, or do some changes about the story. Nonlinear, on the other hand, presents the audience with multiple paths from point A to point B. It predetermines all of the ends but does not specify any of the means. This heightens the immersion of many users by creating a bridge between the narrative world and reality. So this is what happened, class, to our Provinciano series or drama. Um, this Provinciano, though, uh, um, we thought that it's about to end, but still it doesn't, because um, the writer is trying to combine uh, imaginary world and realistic world. Okay, so it has a lot of twist. This is normally what happens, or this is very evident in Philippine dramas or stories. Non-linear plot. Next, we have episodic plot structure. For the episodic plot structure, though, from the word episode, so um, even if it is made up of a series of chapters or stories linked together by the same character, the same place, or the same theme, but held apart by their individual plot, purpose, and subtext. In fact, the chapters or stories could be shuffled around and placed in different order if desired, because there is no overall beginning, middle, and end to the book or story as a whole. So, an episodic plot structure class, it allows us to jump from one chapter or episode to another. Even if we do jump from one chapter to another, we still can understand what happened in the story because they are held apart from one another. And